I've been working on my thesis at the University of Eichstätt since 2021. Formerly, I studied Romance studies, political science, and media ethics. And in my thesis, I take a very interdisciplinary approach to the topic between social sciences and philosophy. So you will hear everything of that. In the 2010s, talk of the truth became more prevalent again, which has to do with political crisis and digital technologies. Trump, Brexit, disinformation, fake news, filter bubbles, fragmented public spheres, information deserts, the corona infodemic, populism, propaganda, to give you just some buzzwords. And AI. Pope Francis speaks of an age in which the art of counterfeiting is becoming ever more sophisticated. Overall, the dictum of the post-factual age dominates the debate. This does not mean that there are no more facts, but that perceived realities do count more politically. And journalism, which is supposed to inform us about reality, is right in the middle of it. In 1981, media ethicist Hermann Boberter said that journalism and truth enter into a relationship that has remained undiminished. But today, hasn't truth become obsolete as a meta concept? Doesn't Trump show that it doesn't matter how much you lie? Do fact checks, clarification, information, and reason achieve anything? Doesn't social media have an impact so strong that we cannot rely any longer on a shared reality? And hasn't truth rightly gone out of fashion after so many crimes have been committed in its name? My hypothesis is this. I think that truth continues to be the most important orientation principle for journalism. It is the search of truth that defines it as a profession, particularly in the face of the new challenges. And as a consequence, a society that wants to be built strong by having true information has to rely on journalism. A postulate: from a media ethics perspective, it is important to demand the norm of truth with regard to the function of the media, as it is central to individual and collective self-determination, opinion forming, and political participation in liberal democracies. There are a lot of books written about truth. These are only some German ones. Serious information journalism is, alongside the sciences, the profession that is dedicated to the search of truth. It is about describing reality, about answering the W questions: what happened, when, where, how, who was involved, and why. Everything revolves around a supposedly simple world relationship: reality here, the audience there, and in between, the objective journalist. A correspondent's understanding of truth: the journalist describes what is, and the audience believes him. Has that really ever been the case? There is a quote from the church critic André Gide. It reads, it's in French here, I cite it in English: believe those who seek the truth and doubt those who find it. Oh no, sorry. Too fast. This summarizes what is at stake. 3,000 years of philosophical theory have already been devoted to the question of what truth is. The records to intellectual history is essential in order to understand why today it is so difficult with the truth. For the question of what truth means in journalism, I choose an approach of reconstructive ethics that does not make idealistic demands, but rather seeks to reconstruct what moral knowledge already exists. First of all, we are all dependent on truth in our everyday human communication. Without the basic distinction between truth and untruth, human communication cannot function, because otherwise nobody would know what the matter is and whom they can trust. We rely on the truth of what someone says countless times every day. Nothing upsets us more than being lied to and deceived. Communication is language. We have to be able to trust the correctness of the linguistic categorization of signs and signifieds. Yeah, truth refers to communicated facts, and truthfulness to the behavior of a person. It is about the multiple basic needs We only experience communication as respectful if the criterion of truth applies. And we do not want to lose our connection to tangible reality. The need for truth is part of our need for meaning. This makes it normative for us to tell the truth. But we must always consider the area of application, the relational aspect. Each area of communication follows different rules. Dietrich Bonhoeffer describes this multiple relation. You must not only have truth in mind, but also recognize and consider in which circle of life you are moving in each case, and which people you are talking to, so that your word becomes true. According to Jürgen Habermas, propositional sentences automatically make a claim to truth. This happens in the way the speaker shows his conviction that his statement can be justified. Truth claims have something to do with justifiability. If the listener doubts the truth content, a discourse must clarify whether the speaker's claim is justified. And these are some reasons for why lying in politics confuses us deeply. That lies and propaganda are inherent to totalitarian politics may still seem comprehensible. But how can populists like Trump get along over years in democratic systems with obvious lies and fakes? I think it has to do a lot with differentiations between lies and fake news, disinformation, misinformation, and bullshit, untruth. There are a lot of contrary categorizations to truth, and they all follow different intentions. I don't want to focus here so much on how journalists can cope with political lies, how they can react to fakes and misinformation. I rather want to ask what kind of truth journalism is seeking and telling as a basic orientation for people in their political being and as citizens. Since we gain most of our knowledge about the world through the media, truth is seen as a general principle also in media theories. In public communication mediated by the mass media, truth is one of the values established in normative theories and widely accepted. Norms come primarily into journalism as an institution, and they come through political ideas. In the West, its development is historically closely linked to democracy, enlightenment, freedom, and self-determination. And the authority of journalism is also derived from its democratic system function. The concept of truth is firmly anchored in the official understanding of the journalistic profession. The truth principle is central to the few regulating documents. The Bavarian Press Act, for example, says that journalism has the duty to report truthfully. Truth is also mentioned in EU recommendations and even more so in ethical guidelines, such as the German Press Act, which you can see here in the first place. Respect for the truth, the preservation of human dignity, and the truthful information of the public are the highest imperatives of the press. The concept of truth is central to most of the press codes of 46 European countries. In 1910, the truth appeared in the first code of ethics in the USA. There's also the Worldwide International Federation of Journalists that relaunched its Global Charter of Ethics for Journalists in 2019. Paragraph 1 states, "Respect for the facts and for the right of the public to truth is the first duty of the journalist." I found truth and truthfulness as a guiding principle at an organizational ethical level in the editorial principles of many leading media, and it is also an issue in terms of individual ethics. Since the 2010s, many book titles by journalists have been published on the subject of truth. But what do journalists mean by truth? Do they have a great, lofty philosophical understanding? The former journalist Rudolf Walter Leonhardt states, "The truth of the journalist differs from the truth of the philosopher in that it has to be practical, understandable, comprehensible to everyone. Different schools, as in philosophy, would be useless in journalism." Of course, there can be no separate truth for journalists, although it may sometimes seem so to readers. The practicable concept of truth, which underlies all communication, must correspond on the one hand with what is commonly understood by truth, and on the other hand with what philosophers think about truth. Here you see how the ethical level often mixes with the epistemological level, when the question is not only how truth can be saved, but how it can be recognized at all. I would like to take it pragmatically. True is usually called with an intuition of a correspondence relation that is quite close to life, the recognition of what really is. According to this, a statement is considered true if it says, what is the matter? If I say it is raining, this is true if it really is raining, and I can prove this. This does not mean that statement and reality correspond. This is where the the philosophical aspect of the correspondence theory begins. How can statement and reality be compared if we cannot step out of our linguistic forms, out of our mindsets, if we can't define the third thing that mediates between our knowledge and the world? This is why other philosophers conceptualize truth in a system of coherence or as something that arises in discourse. But for journalism, I think it is not so important to decide in favor of one philosophical point of view, but rather to ask what it can learn from the different approaches. What is understood by truth on the practical level in journalism? Truth in journalism has come to be primarily identified with neutral, reliable, verifiable reporting and with expert analysis and interpretation. The main tests of truth are variously found in its application to reality, reference to other sources, personal observation, past experience, or common sense. Truth in journalism is widely identified with the practice of objectivity, which emphasizes neutrality and balance on the part of the reporter, and a limitation as far as possible to verifiable facts of any case. The discussion about truth is closely linked to the question of how objective a journalist should or can be. In the USA, neutrality and objectivity have been a dogma since the 1920s, which is hotly debated now in view of the polarized media. In Germany, the standard of objectivity was never so widely accepted. Since the 1970s, communication scientists have been debating whether objectivity is possible. The radical constructivists, fueled by the findings of brain research, denied any possibility of a true description of reality. Reality is always constructed depending on the observer. Paul Watzlawick said there is hardly a more murderous, despotic idea than the delusion of a real reality. The constructivist positions have contributed to the fact that the journalists today can no longer think that they can work flawlessly objectively or that they are in possession of the truth. Journalistic work boils down to media constructions from the very first second, because we cannot step out of media reality. And apart from that, personal imprints and political attitudes, economic constraints, linguistic guidelines, and the corporate culture in media companies have an unavoidable influence on journalistic work. Nevertheless, on a practical level, journalists are still convicted that objectivity remains the central norm. Journalistic quality criteria such as impartiality, balance, and diversity serve this purpose. There is a pragmatic approach which states that although social reality is collectively generated, it is still possible to make objective statements about it. This solution adheres to the goal of truth but dispenses with ultimate justifications in metaphysics. Today, in the face of conspiracy theorists and climate change deniers, a reversal of the sides of the discourse can be observed. Right-wingers have hijacked formerly left-wing positions of critique of power, while left-wingers are turning away from positions critical of power and emphasizing the importance of facts. The new line of conflict runs between post-factualists who reject everything as ideological and blur the distinction between truth and lies, and factualists who rely on evidence and expertise and tend to justify political action as without alternative. This is where the task for journalism lies, and this constellation makes it clear that truth cannot simply be replaced by objectivity. Accuracy or transparency is some demand. Truth is an indispensable ideal for anyone who wants to find out something. Truth has something to do with setting out on a journey. In practice, journalists work to a certain extent according to critical rational methods. They identify facts and check them. They make their work transparent and allow criticism, and they favor their own observation over secondary experience. This is where journalistic fact-checking comes in. Debunking and pre-bunking. This means exposing and preventing misinformation. Nevertheless, in my opinion, this approach needs to be supplemented. Journalists do well to reflect on their world understanding, hermeneutic approach. Boventer describes journalists as reality hermeneutics. Recognizing social context works differently than observing natural contexts because values and meaning are always involved. Hans-Georg Gadamer sees understanding as the original form of realization of existence. Hermeneutic questioning aims to understand things in their meaningfulness. Understanding is never complete, but at the same time, you should arrive at judgments about the here and now. The hermeneutic is a specifically human way of appropriating reality. AI cannot do that, even if it pretends to. The journalist searches for meaning in facts. She wants to create knowledge, but also an understanding of the world. This begins on a small scale with local journalism and continues right through to war reporting. It includes hermeneutic methods such as openly questioning your subject and knowing yourself within a tradition. Journalists need prior knowledge. They need the context of events in the horizon, as well as their position in the profession. Journalism has always sought the truth, and its history is full of hermeneutic approaches. The journalist appears as a reasoner and as an explorer of truth. A neutral observer role, like the objectivity norm, can be important, but is not the only way to truth. A journalist endeavors to find out and say what the matter is, just as Martin Luther meant his sentence, dicere quod res est. This includes being able to form judgments and to differentiate. This involves learning in a community. The journalist is not in possession of the matter, but searching for clues. If someone can say what the matter is, then they have learned to move back and forth within it, because they are not alone with the matter, but because it is experienced and learned in a shared discourse. Journalists are fundamentally concerned with matters, with facts. But what is facts? Ludwig Wittgenstein distinguishes them from mere possibilities. The world is everything that is the case. It consists of all possible facts, but reality consists only of the existing facts. Our reality therefore includes, for example, the following facts. Donald Trump lost the 2020 re-election. Russia invaded Ukraine. The Earth is getting warmer and warmer for man-made reasons. How can anyone doubt this? Are there any alternative facts? For journalism, the question of fact becomes particularly relevant in the political sphere, where different interests and joint action are at stake. Hannah Arendt is very instructive here. In her understanding of reality, the world is our common space of appearance. Factuality arises when objectivity manifests itself in perspectives and plurality. Arendt distinguishes factual truths, especially historical ones, from scientific truths of reason, such as 2 + 2 is 4. She also distinguishes opinions from factual truths. Politics is the arena of reasoned opinions, but its subject must always be facts. Opinions cannot be true, they can only be well-founded. We can argue about how to deal with the climate crisis, but it must be no question that it exists. For Arendt, truth stands outside the political arena. Facts constitute a common reality. And this is what we all must be concerned about. Otherwise, it will fall by the wayside. Where facts are consistently replaced by lies and total fictions, it turns out that there is no substitute for truth. For the result is by no means that the lie is now accepted as true and truth is defamed as a lie, but that the human sense of orientation in the realm of the real, which cannot function without the distinction between truth and untruth, is destroyed. Journalists must work out such distinctions between rational truths, factual truths, and opinions. And something else is part of the hermeneutic approach, the concept of witnessing. On the one hand, a journalist can be a witness herself, seeing with her own eyes and smelling with her own nose, lends her reports a special factuality and authenticity. On the other hand, she listens to witnesses who have experienced war or suffering. They are irreplaceable sources. The witness, with his genuine place in court, is supposed to make an essential contribution to establishing the truth, to create knowledge where no one else knows anything. Testimony has both a special authority and a special weakness. It is always deficient, but remain dependent on the knowledge of others. We all live in a social epistemology where trust is the currency. Journalists have to reconstruct confused stories or witnesses thoroughly and methodically. In addition, today there is an inflation of testimonial knowledge because a big data volume of image material accumulates by the second. And this knowledge becomes a problem when, in a highly participatory open debate space, the still uncertain epistemic rules, especially in the new social and alternative media, the criteria for reliable testimony are in a state of flux and move away from established institutional approaches. All these media snippets have to be checked, which is done with the help of forensic digital experts and software tools. There are entire teams of experts such as, for example, Bellingcat, who also use data analysis to make hidden structures visible and help to understand reality in more detail. Journalists search for the real thing and often feel like Sisyphus. Which photo can you trust? When supporters of, for example, Hamas and Israel Defense Forces both manipulate and instrumentalize images. What does it do to journalistic work, to citizens, and to society if the basic attitude now must be one of mistrust? As much as AI helps to produce new fakes, it also helps to uncover them. It will stay a race competition for some time. Journalists must keep up with it. However, technology is not the end point of their search for truth. This must continue to take place on the ground, on the street, where people can be spoken to, where something can be witnessed, in the phenomena. Hermeneutic journalism, it means that it requires the search for contradictions for what may also be true. It requires other witnesses, other sources, other perspectives, opposing voices. It requires comparing and reconciling different narratives. It sometimes requires running the narrated routes. The witness is not only a recording device, but a person who already interprets reality themselves. That is why witnessing is always political. Testimonies by witnesses should lead to political judgments and more justice. In this respect, the journalist not only engages in hermeneutic truth-seeking, but also political truth-telling. This brings him closer to Michel Foucault's understanding of parousia, of speaking the truth. A parousiast exercises critique of power. He speaks the truth against all odds, from a lower position and at his own risk. The form of speaking the truth does not seek the approval of others, but is prepared to accept their anger, rage, and resistance. Parousia demands courage. So this can be an additional concept for journalism in a world that is in the midst of a climate crisis, but still dominated by powerful industrial lobbies An environmental journalist, for example, may act as a parrhesia-ist, especially in countries where freedom of the press is strongly endangered. Another problem is that conspiracy theorists also see themselves as parrhesia-ists, which is why other distinctions are needed here. For journalists, parrhesia is a difficult balancing act, as it easily slips into clumsy activism for certain policies. Instead, it is necessary to stick to truth, facts, and human rights without becoming essentialists. The danger is that too strong a parrhesia self-image turns into the know-it-all gatekeeper pose that journalists are still accused of today, when they are too assertive and not questioning enough. It must not lead to an effect of war of facts, but rather to a common search for truth. According to Arendt, truth is constituted in the light of the public sphere, and that is always the place where several perspectives emerge as plural. Plurality and diversity are empirical realities. As values, pluralism is only a means to an end. It is not an end itself, but was invented in order to embark on the search for truth. For journalists, taking in different perspectives is crucial for finding the truth. The relationship between truth, which aims to be universally valid, and perspective, which is always particular, remains ambivalent. Truth only exists in perspectives. But the fact I never see the whole thing doesn't mean I cannot see anything correctly. It's the other way around. I only see something because I see it from a point of view. Perspective is not a limitation, but an opening up of the world. But perspectives are prone to error. How do we deal with that? Can truth perhaps simply be sought, but not be found? Can we retreat to the position of saying that no journalistic report can ever express the truth? That would be wrong. You do not seek in order not to find. Then at some point you no longer seek at all. Rather, everyone has to find the truth for themselves. Because communication makes it possible to share truth without releasing it from its attachment to one's own perspective or making it a self-disposable possession. Journalists must be aware of the provisional nature and perspectivity of all statements, and they also trust in the effectiveness of truth. Truth-seeking journalism must be concerned with this communication of perspectives if it wants to moderate society's dialogue with itself. Some perspectives, of course, open up reality better than others. The quality depends on a number of factors, such as prior knowledge or experience. Thinking in terms of plural perspectives does not simply mean creating a balance between opposing sides, then you fall into the trap of false balance or both-sidism. Instead, we should try to prioritize perspectives differently. Journalistic communication includes the promise of statements about social reality and therefore the search for truth. This is what distinguishes it from public relations and from fiction. Public relations has also a task of information, of giving true information. But in the end, it is interest-driven and no truth-seeking profession by itself. Fiction is also an approach of understanding the world and making it intelligible, but it has no obligation to describe what really happened. Because of these differences, it may still be very important to separate core journalistic business from other forms of communication. Good journalism keeps asking for the truth and doesn't leave it to the populists. Truth journalism takes its quality criteria seriously and uses adequate formats. There are various reporting patterns such as investigative, data, advocacy, narrative, constructive, or interpretive journalism. In their own way, they all ask for a fact-orientated, unconditioned truth that is not metaphysical and not absolute, that is plural. It is more than a consensus truth and not just a matter of feeling. It is the movement of the search for truth that expresses itself in journalistic action. The German journalist Hans Leyendecker says, "When we deal with what is true and right, my opinion is that we can only ever grasp a corner of the truth." Reality constantly confronts journalists with new challenges, but their orientation towards the truth remains the same because they cannot do otherwise. The hermeneutic approach and the principle of truth sensitize journalists to, among other things, the importance of trust, meaning and differentiation of misinformation, a careful selection of topics, or common reality, adherence to professional ethical criteria, a critical use of language, the constructed nature of media reports, an understanding approach to the world, an awareness of perspectivity and plurality, moving between facts and opinions in the political arena, responsibility of the audience, and a lot more. I'm talking about journalism, of course, in general, not so much about the fast, everyday journalism that has to produce breaking news. It is about information journalism in its own understanding of its role, its roots, and its ethos, about the institution and its ideals. In the last part, I would give a short glance to the special case of Christian journalism. I ask how a Christian journalist deals with the truth question. Journalism and the church are both under pressure from the trend that people are still fundamentally looking for reassurance and truth, but that they trust the big institutions less and have fewer ties to them. It is important to realize that both are committed to truth. Journalists seek truth around the facts, and Christians follow the truth of the gospel and faith. My point is that they have to stick to it, both of them. God's truth is revealed in the fact that Jesus enters our earthly reality as his son. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says of himself, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And Pilate asks his famous question, "What is truth?" which indicates a deep search. The search for God's truth characterizes Christian life. The truth of the gospel is constantly being actualized by us. It is something given which is passed on in the practice of faith. At the same time, it is relational, not so much about facts, but about the quality of relationships. It is processual and dialogical and recognizes its own historicity. God has given us humans his word that he will take care of us, that his story with us will continue. We live from this truth as God's faithfulness. And this claim to truth of the churches, which is actualized in a particular way, but applies universally, remains valid even more in pluralism. As a Christian journalist, you therefore stand in two traditions of truth. The Christian tradition can add a deeper dimension to journalistic work, a broader horizon from which the journalist can draw. The traditions often intertwine, for example, with certain democratic or human rights norms, but often they probably simply stand side by side. Their faith and their affiliation to the church may lead journalists, for example, to an even deeper listening to the underdogs of society and to an even deeper concern with the climate crisis, but also maybe to a more constructive, perspective-oriented journalism that shows not only problems, but also solutions, not only bad, but also good news, in their view of the world as God's never-ending story. Especially for people who work in the field of church PR, the big questions are, how can journalists report the truth about the church, not only the scandals? And how can the Christian truth be conveyed into the world? One example is, for a truth-oriented public discourse in special topics, we urgently need religious arguments. We cannot discuss abortion and assisted suicide in a truth-oriented way if Christian arguments are not also brought in. It is crucial for theological ethics that it does not have a say in everything, but that it introduces strong Christian positions. They will not be able to apply to everyone, just as all truth claims remain particular in pluralism. But for positions to be taken seriously, they must be recognizable. The truth of the gospel is bound to particular communities, which does not alter its universal claim to be valid for all people. The truth remains a constant point of reference. All Christian speech only makes sense if it relates to this truth, even if no one can claim this truth for themselves. Church can only stick to its way of understanding reality, just as journalism does. They have to make it clear to people that truth and trust always have to do with non-digital reality. We have to talk about truth for a common understanding, and this distinguishes us from AI. AI doesn't understand anything. That's why large language models with their chatbots actually cannot take over journalistic work. They are tools, not the craftsman himself. They cannot tell the truth because they don't understand anything. They write texts without sense or reason. They can only find facts that we humans have fed them. They construct a wide mixture of reality in a technically opaque way. What we must be aware or afraid of is the disinformation problem that the misuse of AI via social media can lead us to the situation described by Arendt, when facts are replaced by lies, and where the fundamental principle of trust is replaced by mistrust in everything. It is fine when people get angry about politics. It is bad when they say, "I don't care what is true." At the same time, we can make good use of AI services to track down fakes and make hidden structures visible. AI is no natural power. The decision-making is in our hands. Journalism and church can only keep in mind the fundamental tasks of truth. They should help to keep the discourse open and rational and bring people into dialogue. They must both think politically, but must not want to do politics. For the case we are moving away from deliberative towards more militant forms of democracy, both will probably have to take a political stance. But at their core, both must be concerned with their respective truths. Eberhard Schockenhoff says that the particular realizations of truth in various professional fields, such as journalism, can be understood as infinite refractions of God's eternal truth. All human search for truth stands in the space of divine truth. In the end, it is probably a great openness that characterizes good journalism to the lives of others who are also seeking truth. The awareness of living in God's truth does not promote intolerance or intolerance towards those who think differently, but rather a calm confidence that the truth, despite all passionate disputes, does not belong to anyone in an exclusive way. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.